Oh hi. Sydney, the biggest and oldest city of Australia of 12,144.6 km. Which population as of June 2017 made 5,131,326 people. Sydney is the capital of the state of New South Wales. The city was founded in 1788 by Arthur Phillip, who arrived at the head of the first fleet here and was the place of the first colonial European settlement in Australia. The city was called by colonists in honour of the Lord of Sydney, being at the time the Minister of Colonies of Great Britain. Sydney is located on the southeast coast of Australia. The settlement was under construction on the bank of the Round Small Bay, Sydney. The extended Bay Sydney Harbour located in a middle part, the southern branch of the Gulf. Harbour. Port Jackson separated by the narrow passage. 1 km from the Tasman Sea. Further, the city was under construction to the south from the Bay Sydney Harbour. It up to 20 km long with a width from 1 to 3 km and depth up to 50 m. And then and around it. It caused that Sydney often called the city near the bay. Over time, city constructions completely captured the Gulf. Port Jackson, including 3 bays, Sydney Harbour, Average Bay and Northern Bay. Now Sydney even more expanded and includes the Gulf Botany Tasmanova Moria located to the south, on which northern coast the international airport of Kingsford of Smith is located. The city of Sydney is well known for the Opera Theatre, Harbour Bridge and the beaches. Residential quarters of Big Sydney are surrounded with national parks. The coastline, both external sea and intracity, is cut extremely up. It abounds with numerous gulfs, bays, islands and beaches. According to classification of the University of Loughborough of 1999, the city belongs to the category of the cities of A beta class. Sydney was the venue of numerous international political and sporting events, such as Games of the British Empire of 1938, the Olympic Games of 2000, World Cup on Rugby of 2003. In September 2007 in Sydney, the meeting of leaders of the countries of APEC took place. In July 2008 there took place the International Youth Day here. Sydney is one of the most multicultural and multinational cities of the world. That is caused by the fact that the city is the main place of residence of the immigrants arriving to the constant place residence to Australia. According to a research Mercer, Sydney wins first place in Australia on costs of life and the 66th place in the world on this indicator. The city is founded by the English colonists in 1788 in Sydney. In honour of the Minister of Colonies of Great Britain, Lord Thomas Sydney is called. In the same 1788, but several months earlier, nearby put the Port Jackson, soon absorbed by Sydney. Therefore, in historical and geographical literature of the end of 18th, the beginnings of the 19th centuries quite often meet combinations Port Jackson. Nowadays Sydney. A Sydney. The former Port Jackson. The modern researches based on the radioisotope analysis demonstrate that Aboriginals of Australia, natives, for the first time has come to the area in the territory of which Sydney, about years ago now, is located. The natives inhabiting this area belong to Group Caddagat. Before arrival here of Europeans, they possessed the territory located to the south from the Gulf Port Jackson, where presently the central regions of the city are located. Though the exact number of the natives living in this area before arrival of Europeans to call rather difficult, it is supposed that they were 80 people. In 1770, James Cook, during the first round the world expedition, floating from New Zealand on the west, I discovered Novaya Zemlya, called by New South Wales. Moving ahead along the coast on the north, he landed on the peninsula of Carnal in the Gulf Botany, called them in honor of botanists Banks and Solander of the expedition. The expedition spent 8 days here, surveying flora, fauna and mapping these places, then moved along the coast the north. After in 1776 the War of Independence of the USA began, Americans refused to accept the convicts directed to them from Great Britain, and the British prisons began to be overflowed. The Parliament and the Minister of Colonies Sidney Ann, who was the botanist Banks's friend, made the decision to send settlers prisoners to Botany Bay to found their new British colony. The first fleet, organized by the navies of Great Britain from 11 ships and vessels, 2 warships, a leader of Sirius, the 10-gun armed merchant ship, 511 tons, and the armed tender of supply of 175 tons for messenger service, 6 transports with prisoners, from 278 to 452 tons, and 3 vessels with supplies, from 272 to 378 tons. Headed by the Captain Arthur Phillip, arrived in Botany Bay in January 1788. At more careful inspection of coast of Botany Bay, this place was recognized insufficiently suitable for a foundation of new colony, first of all because of a lack of fresh water, salt and susceptibility to winds. Arthur Phillip personally on supply surveyed the Gulf Port Jackson, located in only 12 km to the north, which James Cook designated on the card, but in details didn't survey. Having entered into Port Jackson, on supply found out that it is the Big Three Hose Gulf. Having surveyed a small northern sleeve, now it is North Harbour. He then came into the wide southern sleeve of the Gulf, curved and inaccessible to oceanic winds and waves. Now Sydney Harbour, where found very comfortable round bay. On January 26, 1788, all First Fleet passed from Botany into Port Jackson, and dropped an anchor in this small round bay, subsequently called the Sydney Bay, English Sydney Cove. Located in a middle part of the extended 20-kilometer Sydney Bay, English Sydney Harbour, branched Gulf Port Jackson. The Captain Arthur Phillip declared accession to Great Britain of New South Wales, creation of the pioneer settlement here, and that he from now on is the first governor of New South Wales. Now this day, a national holiday of Australia. It was originally supposed to call the new settlement Albion, however at the last minute Arthur Phillip decided to call it in honour of the Lord of Sydney N, who was at the time the Secretary of Great Britain for Colonies. The First Fleet was followed soon by the Second, and then in the Third. In essence, they differed in nothing from the first, as I was a main objective of these expeditions, as well as in the first case, transportation of prisoners from the British prisons in a gain-formed colony. The Second Fleet was, however, noted that in way many people died from scurvy and other diseases. Sydney long time remained the main place of the link of prisoners from Great Britain. In spite of the fact that since 1815, after the end of Napoleonic Wars, free immigration began to gain steam, in 1820 about 40% of the population were made by prisoners. Soon after 1789, among the natives inhabiting the area directly adjacent to Sydney, the strongest epidemic of smallpox, as a result of which thousands from them died, burst. In 1808 in Sydney there was a so-called Rum Revolt. It was caused by an attempt of the Governor of New South Wales, William Bligh, who became famous as one of the main participants of the events connected with a mutiny by the Bounty ship to interrupt monopoly of officers of the case of New South Wales for alcohol. Using the boundless power in colony, officers turned inhabitants practically into slaves, using alcohol instead of money when calculating for goods and services. After the long debate and negotiations, opposition turned into open confrontation, which led to arrest and shift from a position of the Governor Bligh. This mutiny became the only example of the successful armed seizure of power in Australia. After arrival in Sydney of the new military contingents, the case was disbanded. The officers participating in a revolt were punished. However, and the Governor Bligh was displaced from the post and Macquarie is replaced on more liberal Lachlan. The urban areas of Sydney are located in the coastal valley, which is limited from the east to the Pacific Ocean, the Blue Mountains from the west, the River of Hawkesbury in the north and Royal National Park in the south. The coastline is cut up by numerous gulfs and bays which were formed as a result in process of warming of climate at the end of Ice Age and rise in global sea level, water-flooded coastal river valleys and gorges of low mountains. The Gulf Jackson port, including the Sydney Bay, Sydney Harbour, represents such education and is the largest natural bay in the world. In the territory of residential areas of the city there are about 70 small gulfs and beaches, including the well-known Bondi Beach of Anne in the southern part of the city and Manly's beaches in the north. The area of residential areas of the city was 1687 km for 2001. However, the Bureau of Statistics of Sydney uses in the calculations the much bigger area, including the Blue Mountains, the Central Coastal District and national parks, adjacent to the city. Thus, the total area of Big Sydney is 12145 km. Geographically, Sydney is between two regions. The plain Cumberland, rather flat area to the south and the west from the Gulf, and the Plateau Hornsby located to the north from the city. The oldest historic districts of the city are on the southern coast of the Gulf Jackson port. The northern coast began to develop much later because of the more mountainous relief and lack of simple access here on an initial stage of development of the city. The main message with the northern coast, Sydney Harbour and remote points of the Gulf Jackson port then was kept. And now proceeds by ferries with the central pier of the city. It is called as Circular Quay in translation, Circular Pier or Circular Pier, and is located on the bank of the historical Sydney Bay, with which and development of the city went. The situation with development of northern districts of the city sharply exchanged only after 1932, when the construction of Harbour Bridge was completed. Sydney is located in a zone of subtropical oceanic climate with characteristic of a moderately hot summer and a moderately warm winter. The amount of precipitation dropping out in the city is distributed within a year, with advantage in winter months. In the districts of the city directly adjacent to the ocean, the climate is more equal. However, in the western districts of the city located more deeply in continental Australia, more extreme splashes in temperatures are often observed. Warmest month January, with the average day temperature of 16.6, 25.8 C, and the average number of days with air temperature more than 30 C minus 14.6 is. The absolute record of temperature was set on January 18, 2013 during a wave of a strong heat in Australia. Air temperature was 45.8 C, in suburbs to 47 C. The powerful heat at several o'clock was brought by strong hot western wind which together with the sun in several hours warmed the city on 24 C. At the same time, next day wind was replaced with the return, and temperature above 22 C didn't rise anymore. Winter temperature seldom falls below 5 C in coastal areas. Coldest month July with a daily average temperature of 16.2 C is. Record-breaking low temperature was recorded in Sydney at the level of 2.1 C. Rainfall is distributed within a year more or less evenly, with some prevalence in the first months of year when weather in the city is defined by east winds. The average annual amount of precipitation in Sydney makes 1217, the average number of rainy days in a year minus 138. Snowfall was recorded in the central part of the city last time in 1836. However, that snow rainwood dropped out in the city in 2008, which sometimes mistakenly is accepted to snow, forces to think that the phenomenon of 1836 could have the same character and wasn't snow. In 1947 in Sydney there passed the hail from which more than 1,000 people suffered. Though Sydney isn't strongly subject to influence of cyclones, El Niño plays a large role in formation of climate of the city. Depending on a phase, this phenomenon can become, on the one hand, the reason of droughts and wildfires, with another, provoke storm and floods. Many urban areas which are located in close proximity to the wood and bush are exposed to the direct risk of wildfires. The fires were especially strong near the city in 1994 and also in 2001-2002. Especially fire-dangerous seasons are the spring and summer. In the city the hailstorm and strong gales is quite often observed. One of the strongest grads dropped out in the territory of the city in 1999. He caused an essential loss to the central and east regions of Sydney. During the storm, the separate ice floes which were on a silver platter had the sizes about 9 centimeters a diameter. It led to the destructions which are estimated insurance companies approximately at $1.7 billion. Sydney is subject to floods which result from the plentiful rains which are dropping out in the city generally in winter and springtime. Plentiful rainfall during this period, in turn, is caused with passing over territories of East Australia areas of low pressure. Besides plentiful rainfall, weather during this period is characterized by strong winds and frequent storm at the sea. The severest flood occurred in Sydney on August 6, 1986, when on the city within 24 hours 327.6 millimeters of rainfall dropped out. This flood led to transport paralysis in some parts of the city and also caused damage to many buildings. According to the Australian Meteorological Bureau, the period between 2002 and 2005 was characterized the hottest summer months from the moment of the beginning of observations in 1859. In 2004 the average maximum of daytime temperatures was 23.39 C, in 2005, 23.35 C, in 2002, 22.91 C, in 2003, 22.65 C. During the period between 1859 and 2004 the average day maximum of temperatures was 21.6 C. Since November 2003, in Sydney there were only 2 months when average maximum daytime temperature was lower than average for the period. March 2005. Temperature is lower than average on 1C. And June 2006. 0.7C. However, according to these bureaus, the summer of 2007/08 was one of the coldest for all history of observations. According to these data, the summer of 2009/10 was the coldest in 11 years and also the most rainy in 6 years. It was all the third summer for all history when daytime temperature didn't rise above 31°C. In the architectural relation, Sydney combines multi-story buildings in the centre and the extensive private sector with colonial houses with verandas and around them. In the city there are a lot of religious buildings. Christian Anglican churches, St. Peter, St. Philip and others. Orthodox Christian Saint of Sophia and Peter and Paul Cathedral, Catholic Cathedral of Virgin Mary, large mosques church. Mosque Lakenby and Mosque Obrangallipoli. And big synagogue. Sydney Opera House is the UNESCO World Heritage Site. In Sydney there was never the general city governmental body, on the contrary, the city is divided into areas of local government. District Prefecture. Council submitting to the local government. Local government areas. Electoral councils of these districts are given authority from the government of the state of New South Wales and have extensive duties from cleaning of garbage before local planning. Districts in turn are divided into areas, suburbs. Each district elects to itself the mayor. The mayor of one of the oldest districts of the city, the urban area Sydney, City of Sydney, is called the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Lord Mayor of Sydney, but is responsible only for the district. However, in certain cases the Lord Mayor can represent all Sydney, for example, during the Olympic Games. Generally, life of the city is controlled by the government of the state. It includes public transport, the main roads, management of traffic, police, education are higher than the level of kindergarten, planning of large infrastructure projects. As the main part of the population of New South Wales lives in Sydney, the government of the state always reluctantly shared powers with the local governments and even changed borders of districts. So, since 1945 city borders Sydney were changed by the government of the state at least 4 times. Now 38 districts are a part of Sydney. Inhabitants born abroad. Country population. 2006. Great Britain 175,166. People's Republic of China 109,142. New Zealand. Vietnam 62144. Lebanon 54502. India 52975. Philippines 52087. Italy 44563. Hong Kong 36866. South Korea 32124. Russia 5364. Ukraine 4330. According to a census of 2006, in Sydney and its vicinities there were 4,119,190 inhabitants, at the same time in Sydney -3,641,422 persons. Most often Sydney it's noted that they the Australian, English, Irish, Scottish and Chinese origin. The census also showed that 1.1% of natives live in Sydney, and 37.7% of the population were born outside Australia. 18.1% of residents natives of Asia. Three main sources of immigrants: Great Britain, China and New Zealand. They are followed by Vietnam, Lebanon, India, Italy and Philippines. Many inhabitants except English know at least one more language, most often Chinese, Cantonese or North Chinese, Arab, Greek and Vietnamese. 13220 people spoke Russian, 156 of them didn't answer a question of the level of proficiency in English. Sydney takes the 7th place in the world on percentage of the inhabitants born abroad. Average age of inhabitants minus 36 years, 15.4% is more senior than 65, 15. 2% have at least a bachelor's degree. According to a census of 2011, speak persons Russian, 181 of them didn't answer a question of English. Inhabitants lived in the city. 60.9% from them considered themselves Christians, 17.6% don't adhere to any religion, 7.6% didn't answer a question, 4.7% Muslims, 4.1% Buddhists, 2.6% Hindus, 0.9% Jews and 1.6% representatives of other religions. The most important sectors of economy of Sydney, if to judge by the number of the workers occupied in them: services industry, trade, production, healthcare and public service are. Since 1980 years, the general situation in labor market changes in such a way that all the sheer quantity of jobs passes from the sphere of production into services industry and the sphere of information technologies. The economy of Sydney makes about 25% from all economy of Australia. In the city, the Australian Stock Exchange, AS, and the Reserve Bank of Australia, and also the headquarters of 90 banks and more than a half of the largest companies of the country are located. Sydney is the main centre of Australia, in which regional offices of the international companies are located. Then there are about 500. From 10 largest Australian companies, 4 have head offices in Sydney: Teltex Australia, Commonwealth Bank, Westpac and Woolworth. Fox Studios Australia has a big film studio in the city. The Sydney Exchange of Futures, SFI, is one of the largest exchanges of this kind in the Australian and Pacific region. It is the 12th largest future exchange in the world and the 19th the largest if to consider a turn of options. According to the research Forbes, in 2014 Sydney took the 8th position in the list of the most influential cities of the world by the number of the involved foreign investments and also on state of the economy in general. Residents have the highest average income per capita in Australia. It is $, for the person. As of 2004, unemployment rate was in the city 4.9%. According to a research of the magazine The Economist, Sydney takes the 16th place in the list of the most expensive cities of the world. Other researches show that the city is in the 15th place on the level of earnings of its inhabitants. As of September 20, 2007, the average price of houses in Sydney was the highest among the largest Australian cities and was card $1. Sydney also has the highest average level of a rent in Australia. She makes $450 a week. The central part of the city, besides a large number of offices, has a huge number of shopping centers, shops and shops. Visit of shops, numerous cultural and sports events, architecture, historical places and the nature of the city, surprising on beauty, attracts numerous tourists as from Australia here, and from around the world. Statistically, in 2004 the city was visited by 7.8 million Australian tourists and 2.5 million guests from abroad. In Sydney, the network of highways as residents widely use cars for movement is widely developed. There is a system of speedways, motorway, a part of which paid, tollway, a part free, freeway. Large roads are united in 10 highways, metros, which include 110-kilometer orbital network, Sydney Orbital Network. Sydney has well-developed network of public transport, bus routes, the taxi and trains. In the Sydney Gulf and down the River Parramatta, flowing into the Gulf, passenger ferries ply. Since January 2, 2012, single fare in the central part of the city. Zone multi-1 is equal in the bus. Odd 3.5, 6.1, there and back. For adults and respectively 1.7 and 3.0 for children. The week ticket in the same zone for all means of transport. The bus, the train, the ferry. Costs according to Odd 43 and 21.5 without restriction of number of trips. In December 2012, the system of paper tickets was abolished and the last vending machines of tickets were dismantled at the end of 2016. The introduced system of the contactless travel Opal N cards captured all means of transport. Now it can use for trips by bus, the tram, the subway and the ferry. The first branch line was opened in 1855 between Sydney and Parramatta. Now trains ply 20 hours a day on the network. 2080 came along with 306 stations, including country. An interval of train service about 15 minutes of rush hours, of the rest of the time minus 30 minutes. In city and east regions of the train go underground. Transition to electric locomotives began in 1926. Now all City Railway Park is electrified, the supply voltage of 1505 of a direct current. About 270 million passengers a year use trains. On May 26, 2019 in Sydney, also the only subway in Australia with one line 36 came along with 13 stations open first. She connects suburbs Rose Hill and Chatswood and also the Sydney Business Centre and Port. The network of bus routes of Sydney approximately coincides with the tram network abolished now. Number of the bus usually represents three-digit number, which first figure, as a rule, indicates the district of the city where this route operates. So for example, buses with numbering of 3 Hes lie in east districts of Sydney, and 8 Hes routes in southwest. The State Company State Transit Authority Station, and belonging to the Government of the State of New South Wales, manages work of bus networks of Sydney and Newcastle and also work of passenger ferries. The bus fleet of both cities makes more than 2,100 cars, which are based in 13 depots. History of the first Sydney ferries can be tracked far in the past. In arrival times of the first fleet when in 1789 the ferry from the Sydney Gulf up the river to the farmer settlements of Pyramiddy went. The first official ferry was constructed by prisoners and sailed also oars. The travel to Parramatta took about a week. By 1899 the Sydney Ferry Company became the largest ferry company in the world. But after opening Harbour Bridge on March 19, 1932, the number of passengers was sharply reduced from 30 to 13 million a year. Now ferries transport about 14 million passengers annually, many of which travel not only around affairs, but just for pleasure, especially around the days off. So in 2009-2010 the routes going to the region of Manly, known for the beaches and an aquarium with the longest in the world, a 110-meter underwater tunnel. The last record selling tickets in one day was set on January 2, 2011 when 94918 tickets, and nearly a half of them, along a route in Manly, were sold. Today the fleet consists of 28 ferries connecting a network of 38 piers, extent of network -37 km. The tram network of Sydney, abolished now, was once the second after London on extent in the British Empire and one of the world's largest. The first horse tram existed from 1861 to 1866. In 1879 routes with trams on steam draft appeared. Electrification of ways began in 1898 and in 1910 was generally completed. The network reached the maximum length in 1923, 291 km, 181 miles. By 1930 the park made about 1,600 cars. The maximum number of passengers was transported in 1945, 405 million. The increasing competition from privately owned vehicles and buses and also traffic jams led to gradual closing of routes. The last tram passed across Sydney in 1961. In some places and now rails remained, but old trams go only on a short, kilometre way from the museum of the tram deep into of Royal National Park. More than 30 years after closing of the last tram route, in 1997, the new easily rail tram route of Metro Light Rail opened. Not to confuse with the subway. In 2000 and 2014 it lasted, and now there passes from the Central Railway Station, Central Station, to the area Dulwich Hill. Length of a route of 12.8 km with 23 stops. About 3.9 million passengers use this route annually. There is a project of construction of a new branch from Central Station through City to the Central Ferry Pier of Circular Quay, located within walking distance from Opera Theatre, the Royal Botanical Garden. Royal Botanic Gardens and other tourist attractions. Construction was begun in 2015. There is also an idea to lay branches to the University of Sydney and the University of New South Wales. Sites: Sydney Opera House, the Australian Museum, one of the oldest museums of Australia, earlier called by the Museum of Sydney. The Sydney Museum. Museum Power Station. Museum of Science. Australian National Maritime Museum. Sydney Town Hall. Sydney Aquarium. Sydney Television Tower. Centennial Parklands, the park in Sydney. The house on Elizabeth Bay N. Fermat Elizaveta N. Museum of Justice and Police. Justice and Police Museum. Haus Seidler N. Estate Rouse Hill Inn. House of Marugel. Susanna Place Museum. Sydney Mint. Estate Vauclushausen. Hyde Park Barracks N. Government House N. Harbour Bridge. Virgin Mary's Cathedral. Pier of the Gulf Woolloomooloo. Darling Harbour Embankment. Bondi Beach. Zoutaronga. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.